All right, so I guess we are on time. So let me kick this off. Good morning, good evening, everyone. It's great to see you all here for our latest Sitecore User Group Jaipur meetup. Today we are excited and honored to have Kelly Rusk with us to present about successful Sitecore Go live planning. So let me tell you about Kelly. Kelly is a seven-time Sitecore Technology MVP and working as an enterprise architect at Clotech. So I would like to hand over the session to Kelly, and Kelly, you may begin your presentation.
Thank you all, and thank you all for attending today. I respect your time, and I hope, really, with any presentation, that if you can get only one thing out of it that makes your life easier, then I would say it'd be a success. Please, raise your hand, ask questions as you walk through here. These presentations are not very fluffy. They're meant to be very driven and very runbook oriented, so that you can walk away and hopefully take it back to your organization or think of one way to make your life better when launching your Sitecore site. So when we talk about this in specifics, we're going to be going over a few key topics today. Um, that's going to be talking about the risk of not go live planning and what happens to those who decide just to throw caution to the wind. We're going to talk about establishing your go live team and their contact information, a soft launch methodology, how to establish good communications and business readiness plannings, as well as pre-launch activities, your go live, launch day, post-launch, and we'll wrap up with any questions. Any questions before I get started? And question for anybody in the room, have you recently launched a Sitecore site? Has anyone done a rebrand or had a recent launch?
We are in the planning, not right now.
All right. So maybe we're catching you at a good time to think of some things to consider before you cut over. And this could be a brand new site. It could be a rebrand. Anything that you're doing, anytime you're going with a fresh deal that requires a cutover, we want to think about go live planning in a proper sense. So let's first talk about what not to do. So the risk of not go live planning really is like jumping off a cliff without a parachute. Yeah, you can do it, but it's probably not recommended. So with that, here's what happens. You get a stressful cutover with code deployment the day of. That's never fun and it lengthens the time of your go live. You have rushed and incomplete testing because everyone's just rushing to get everything live before the window closes. You may have instability impacting user experience. And along with this, as you're running through your day, you're trying to get the site up, you're going to have miscommunication happen. You're going to have gaps in your platform. As a result, maybe you forgot a certificate. Maybe you forgot a network communication. You're just scratching your head and trying to figure out what's gone wrong. Why is it not working as marketing and everyone's trying to promote the new site? It's very, very stressful. And you'll find often that your business is not trained or ready for the change. So you put the site out there, maybe you as IT have operated, but you forgot about your business partners. And that's very, very dangerous because now you've kind of launched into failure. And along with that failure, you might have introduced security risks if you just hard launch your website. And as I joke around in a Twitter post last week, you can hard launch a relationship, but you should never hard launch your Sitecore site for a lot of these reasons. And with this stress and the machinations of do we deploy the code? Is the networking not working? Is a load test showing well? Do we even load test to begin with? You're going to burn out your team and lose team members. And one of the biggest things here is if you fail to launch successfully, you're going to damage your brand. And that brand's both externally facing for your users, if they have a negative experience, and internally. People are going to start wondering, why doesn't Sitecore work? Well, the reality is Sitecore might work fine, but you failed to do some key things to be successful. So the first things we really want to do and talk about being successful is making sure you've got the right team. And really, the right team for the right job comes down to making sure that you've got uh, all the right roles and their contact information. I've gone through a few go lives where we had the right team together, but nobody had the contact information. So they couldn't get a hold of somebody when they needed to. And that person wasn't aware that they were about to have a go live. And it was a bit of a challenge. Shilpi can attest we had a lot of clients at Rackspace that really needed constant help. And communication was one of the biggest things that really overcomes things. So when you create your go live team, You got to think about, okay, you might have a single individual that's got multiple roles. Maybe they're your Sitecore administrator and they're also your lead developer. So you just want to make sure you got the right roles in the team on the call, ready to go, and ready as part of the go live process. And when you think about your go live team, it should really kind of closely mirror your Sitecore governance committee. If you don't have a Sitecore governance committee, now's the time to get one done. I have an entire blog post dedicated with a template that walks you through the steps to create that team. And what that looks like generally for go live is that you've got an executive sponsor. They're really the person who's probably paid for the project internally. You've got your business owner and your project managers who work together closely. It might be the same person who tries to drive and lead and organize a lot of communication. And you get into your Sitecore roles, but also your network and infrastructure roles. And notice that we've got your marketing manager and your internal communications lead. That's because you need to make sure that you communicate out with your business and that your marketing aspects are ready to go. This is really your critical team for preparing for go live. So once you have this team identified, you start thinking about, okay, what does this team do? Well, one of the first things the team does is they have to adopt a soft launch methodology. And this is really all about not doing things the hard way. But what you do in a soft launch methodology is that you actually deploy your entire website, all the four C's, your code, content configuration, and your cloud platform infrastructure. You deploy that before you make it publicly accessible. And what this does, it gives you a way to test your DNS, test all your infrastructure, test your code, and make sure everything's working. So that when you go live, you're literally just turning over your DNS. You're saying, hey, you know, test.com now points to our new Sitecore environment. Your users will just see your new website, and this gives you the opportunity to really make sure that everything's working properly, which is critical. Now, how long you have it up there and what you do there really depends on content freeze availability and some other aspects. But really, the whole goal here is to reduce that launch risk with less moving parts. You don't want to be finding out the day of that you don't have your certificates, or that your infrastructure is not communicating with your back end, or that something went wrong with your code. This is not the day to find out. This is the day just to validate that you've cut over, everything's still working, and that a lot of the risk is just on your public DNS and making sure it properly communicates. Taking this approach greatly reduces the complexity and complications running back. You're able to validate all your integrations are working. You can load test before you go live. We'll talk about that in a second. And make sure that all the final testing is done, includes having your content authors and your marketing team touching what it will actually be publicly facing. And really, this helps out in a lot of different ways, right? You're also validating your underlying infrastructure. Are your disks performing the way they should? And if you're in a PaaS or SaaS scenario, you're validating all your network communication too from the edge of the network device on in. And launch day becomes less stressful. The day of launch becomes less. If you have an issue, you can just switch back to the old website, which we recommend you keep live. And when we talk about soft launch, I'm really talking about a whole separate Sitecore environment, not updating your code on the same infrastructure. If you're going to do a hard launch, you're literally doing that still in the same infrastructure. If you want to do a soft launch, you've got a whole new Sitecore environment. Why do we do that? Because you want to take advantage of the best technology. It might be the opportunity to upgrade to new app services if you're in PaaS. It might be the opportunity to upgrade your virtual machines to the right Windows version or the most updated Windows version. It might be the opportunity to update your networking. And if you don't do that in a new environment, you're never going to do that. You're missing the opportunities here. Remember, when you do a rebrand or a new Sitecore launch, it's a great opportunity to reevaluate not only your information architecture, but your enterprise architecture, including third-party integrations. Having that separate Sitecore environment that can live by itself as you test things is going to force a lot of conversations, some that may be painful, in the organization to get rid of technical debt. And that's where the soft launch helps with that, because if you can have a whole different environment and you can use a dummy domain to test your website in isolation of what you are publicly serving today, you can load test, make sure your infrastructure is in a good place. You're going to have the good communication going, and you're going to reduce a ton of stress. So I want to pause there for a second and ask, are there any questions so far about soft launching? Does anyone soft launch today? Or do you all tend to hard launch your websites?
Yeah, we do soft launch. One
Okay,
question I
great.
have, doing deployment on XP environment and doing deployment on XM cloud, right? So what is the difference between these criteria if we think about the cloud?
There should be no difference in the
Okay.
sense that if it's a brand new deal, you're just pointing your DNS, what your domain name's pointed to at the time. You're just changing what it points to. So irrespective, honestly, this same soft launch approach could apply to non-Sitecore solutions. The whole goal is that you have your environment in isolation of public traffic until you decide to let the public in. And that includes if you're on XM Cloud. Because if you stand up XM Cloud, you decide when to point your domain name or allow users in to use that. And you can
Okay.
even have your domain live. If it's a brand new site, let's say you're brand new to Sitecore, you don't have an old Sitecore environment to cut back to, you could have that domain name live, but then just do IP restrictions to cut off who can see it. So you can do a lot of clever stuff to just have your domain uh, pointed, uh, but not ready for public traffic yet. Does that help answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
Good question, though. Yeah, and that's a great question because a lot of times we want to think about, don't worry about the complexity of your environment. Just make sure you have a separate environment that you can work on in isolation. Because then if you can load test what's really going to be your production environment, test all the integrations, your life becomes so less stressful. And this is really coming down to, let's not build the rocket as it's launching, right? If you can imagine a bunch of people with parachutes on the side of a rocket with hammers, that's what hard launching basically is, right? We don't want to do that. We want to make sure your rocket's already tested. You've run through several things before you put people in it and shoot it up into the moon. And a key part of that really comes down to your communications plan. And communications plan is not just for after launch. It's really for before, during, and after launch. And we think about a good communications plan, you're really coming down to identifying milestones that trigger communication, the parties you need to communicate to, the date and timely communication, even the owner of the communication, who's going to be that person sending that communication out, the topic, and this is where you can get your go live team. Let those people who specialize in communications be a part of this, and also identify communication channels. And really, the core part of your communication is really to get to any key stakeholders and supporting organizations. You might have third parties that need to be aware of your launch, right? You might have people internally that need to be involved in deployment, and maybe they're part of approvals. So when you talk about your communications planning, an example is you might have like a content freeze. So you need to let the content editors know that on March 4th of 2022, your content manager is letting people know that the freeze is in place. And you know that email and Slack's the best for that. You might have a cutover complete communication that goes company wide. So you want to have that message topic tightly honed and to the appropriate audiences. And what we find is that when you document communication, what needs to be communicated, you're going to find out you might need more or less communication. And you're going to identify that you might have a lot more parties generally that need communications to than you previously thought. So it's very powerful when you write down your communications plan. And obviously it's not just 3 steps here. You could have 18 different communications depending on the size and scope of your launch. And when you think about communication also, you need to make sure your business is engaged. So it basically is who needs to know what when internally to be successful. And when we talk about business readiness, I always say business readiness is our business. In IT, if we're not working with the business, something's wrong. And if you work with them, and this is critical, if you really work with your business stakeholders during go live and planning to go live with your Sitecore environment, you're going to build a great relationship with them. You're going to increase communication so they're not working in isolation. They're not thinking about how do I replace Sitecore or replace the people who work on Sitecore, or how do I go use this other tool that Sitecore might be able to already help with, they're going to be talking with you, and they should be part of your governance committee, and really working with you to make sure that all your activities required for managing the change of the organization are done. So when we talk about change, it could be maybe changing how you access or use workflow. It could be changing where you go to do the work. It could be having new business templates that have different data fields, different schema. You need to let the business know what's going on here. You could have custom tools that deal with registration or selling of tickets or whatever you do for this site. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to good change management principles alongside really strong communication. That's how the business walks with you. So when you go live, they're ready to support it, and you're not running around like crazy on go live day and post go live day. An example of what this might look like is like CMS training for your content editors, right? You might have a change in process for your management team. They need to understand what changes, what approvals you need to be a part of. You might have different governance in place and run books that people need to be aware of. So you might have a company-wide demo of what's changing. What does our new website look like? What do we do to support that website? How do you add content? How do you request content to be added? So this is really where you get that business to be close to you and working with you. And if you leave the business behind, they will leave you behind. So this is the opportunity to really tighten that relationship and make sure everyone's looking at the sky when you put your new Sitecore rocket into launch. So now that you've adopted the self-launch methodology, you have your communications plan in place, you've got your business on board, you need to start talking about your pre-launch activities. And this is called the measure twice, launch once approach. And this is when you're deploying your code to the new environment you're soft launching. This is where you're smoke testing the site, setting up your dummy domain, testing things externally, setting up your APM and testing tools to make sure that once you go live, you can monitor your website and know where there's latency and issues. This is really where you're setting up that whole new environment, load testing, and making sure all the integrations are working. You're basically going live in this pre-launch step without allowing the public to come in. When I say you're going live, you're making sure that end to end, that your new Sitecore site works, the integrations work, and the third parties work. Acknowledging that sometimes you might need to turn that public DNS on. So that's why you need to really work with that dummy domain to make sure that it can access third-party tools as well, has the right whitelisting. You might even do a little SEO work up front to get your site ready. And when we think about this, one of the first things you want to do is have your site testing plan and execute upon it. You might do broken link testing. Once your site's all set up, you've deployed, you can see that certificates are working physically, everything's there. Site testing is really critical. And this is where you're going through site, page by page on your site and making sure that you're reviewing to make sure that everything works as if it's already live and testing all your third-party integrations. That way you don't go live and realize that your principal thing for maybe your payment authorization isn't failing you, right? You're going to document whether it's passed or failed. If it's failed, you want to make sure to go back and fix that. And we talk about, load testing this beyond, this is really user testing to make sure the site, all the pages are working. This is load testing to make sure they can accept the load. And when you're load testing, if you find issues through your load testing, don't just fix that in production. Go all the way back to your development environment, fix it, test it, make it go through QA and all your stage gates, all your DevOps before we run in that test in production. This is critical to make sure that you're not skipping steps, you're not missing the valuable QA and regression that you need to have take place. And when you load test, try your best to get a tool that you can use not only for go live, but post go live. Because post go live, you should have a staging environment where you can test production like to see if something new, like a new feature, new code release is going to be strong and impactful. And if you test, you really want to get a tool that emulates user experience and real users, because doing that and being able to trace your whole user journey is invaluable for knowing if your real load is going to suffice. If you can't do that, you're doing just synthetic testing like JMeter, make sure to bump up what you consider acceptable load by about another 30%. So if your desired load for the homepage is 5,000 concurrent users, test at 6,500. So you want to go above and beyond um, your expected load to make sure everything's running really, really well. And when you do this, you really want to be thinking about, okay, what do I expect for the homepage? What do I expect for registration? We really want to walk through the whole user journey, not just hit your homepage and see the homepage works. Because you have other pages that have different code or different integrations that need to be really thoroughly load tested. And with a soft launch methodology and a separate environment, you have the time to do this and make sure that you're ready. Because if you deployed all your code, checked your configuration, validated that your content is present, and validated that your cloud platform infrastructure is working the way it should, and you load test it, now you're ready for launch. And basically, all what I just talked about is what people do in a hard launch. They're literally holding on to the rocket as it's launching off, trying to build it and make sure it's all ready to go. But if you soft launch with this pre-launch activities approach, you've essentially launched your website. It's ready to go. Your only next thing to do is to point your DNS, your domain name, to this new environment for users to visit it. There's a lot of power in doing this. And I can't emphasize how critical enough this is. Because once you have this, then you can sit down and say, okay, are you ready to go live? Everything's working. Content's there. We've tested it. The business is ready to support it. They've even helped me upload the content. And I want to emphasize this. Content migration is one of the more painful aspects of your site. I've got a whole different presentation about content migration if you want to walk through it. That's going to really impact your go live. Do not forget about content migration. It's often left the last thing to do. It's painful. And if you don't think about it, you're going to end up in a world of hurt. So make sure that your content is migrated. And you might need to keep your content in sync across two environments. If you have an old or existing Sitecore environment, that's just part of the cost of doing business and being prepared to go live. We want to avoid, where possible, migrating content the day of. It's possible you might do that, but try to minimize that the best you can. So if you've got all that stuff in place, again, the 4 C's, your code, content, configuration, cloud platform infrastructure working, now you're ready for go live. When we talk about go live, you really should record your launch dates as finite times and that no changes can be made to the environment. If you change your environment, you've got to scratch your go live. You've changed something. And you don't want those last minute changes. You want to take a real hard line here because I guarantee you the second you say I'm ready to go live, somebody's going to say, wait, one more thing. Well, one more thing means you've got to go back and make sure all your pre-launch activities are set, the environment's stable. Because if you release code after you've already tested your environment, you have to retest it because you've introduced change that could really impact your environment. So when you have a go live meeting, and that's your stakeholders involved, you want to notate the date, time, who's in attendance, identify any issues or concerns. You might have some concerns. There might be a few things you want to fix that you're going to fix post live, and that's okay. But you need to document them and the outcome in deciding yes or no. If it's a no, resolve the issues and concerns. If it's a yes, document it and who is attendance. So when you go live, everyone's accountable. You don't want them saying, well, IT launched a site in the middle of the night. No. If somebody was a part of that meeting, they're at the table. If they're not raised their voice, I'm going to be with a heavy hand here. They're part of the solution. Everyone has a shared responsibility. And all the steps that I've talked about so far is making sure that everyone is engaged, involved, and part of the solution. Because when you do that, you can go into your launch day with confidence. And this is when we get our rocket off the ground, right? So launch day activities, you're really talking about your DNS cutover and making sure that caches and propagation happen. You can see your go live is actually pretty small. And it's small because you've done all the hard work already. You might test your APM tools to make sure everything's there. You might do some sanity testing after the site has been up and live, but in large part, you've already done all the hard work. You know things work because you've already launched them with your soft launch. You've already tested them with your pre-launch. You've already communicated your go and no go. Now you're just letting the traffic in and seeing if real people crash your site or not. This is a great way to reduce risk and making sure that on launch day, you're literally just pressing the button. So when you think about, a new space shuttle being launched into space, it's going up, 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 up. Before it even goes up, you're doing a countdown. That countdown is not having everyone doing last minute checks. The rocket's been there for hopefully a couple of weeks and I already tested on a lot of ways. That countdown is making sure the ignition goes, that you're ready to launch it into space. And when you think about this, don't forget about a rollback plan. Because once you start letting traffic in, nothing will break a site faster than one user. You always find that one user who clicks on the one thing you did not plan on. And to that end, have a rollback plan. And if you do a separate environment, your rollback can be as simple as, okay, well, let's just repoint our domain back to the other A record or the other website, other IP address. So you want to keep stuff in place. When you do a soft launch and go to your new environment, don't immediately cut out your old environment and destroy it. You might need it for a little bit. So having that rollover plan as a worst case scenario gives you additional confidence before you go live. And if something goes wrong, you want to do a root cause analysis, remediate it, go back to go live again, and go back to your launch. So that's literally just going back to the step up here, making sure everything's good on your go live, go to launch day again, and if there's any issues, you can roll back. And again, the soft launch, at this point, you're all dealing with DNS. You're not dealing with code deployments. You're not dealing with content, or you shouldn't be. You should not be changing configurations to make things work. You should have already tested with dummy domains if your third-party integrations work. And a third party, they say we need a real domain to authorize. Give them your real domain, give them a test domain, and get rid of the test domain when you're done. They don't know the difference. Domain names are very flexible. You could change your whole website too. So let's talk about that. When you do a rebrand, your domain name may change. That's great because you can use that domain name as part of your testing. So if I have test.com and I decide to change it over to mytest.com as my new brand identity, I can use that domain name for all the third-party integrations. I can do some IP restrictions. I can finally let all the users in when appropriate. And if I got that launch successful, now you're in post-launch the activities. And this is all about staying in orbit. So when we talk about staying in orbit, this is why having that business involved is so critical. You want to make sure that your governance is working properly. Your APM, I cannot stress enough, have your performance monitoring tools in place to make sure you can automatically monitor and make sure that you don't have latency or issues. Keep your old environment for a little bit to switch back as you need to. And if not already part of a Sitecore governance, make sure you have on-call rotation and escalation procedures. This ensures that if there are issues with your website, say you get a DDoS attack, or you need to make sure your WAF is tuned, because I guarantee your web application firewall with all the AI out there, AI is making bots better and faster and stronger and able to hit your website. So once your site's launched, you can't just dust your hands off and say, I'm done, and walk away. You got to make sure that things are still working well and that you know who can work on fixing things or tuning things to optimize maybe your caching, offload images and stuff to your CDN, and support all your ongoing code releases that come into the environment. So this is, again, a critical part of being successful is making sure you've got this in place. So, with this, you also, as we get into questions here, the last thing I'll say is that if you take this long step back, your organization is going to drag their feet a little bit sometimes. Your go live team has to have your project manager involved. They're your pit bull. They're your dog with teeth to help bark and keep everyone in place. But your whole goal to have a successful Sitecore launch is reduce the stress, adopt a soft launch. A soft launch costs more money. So your business stakeholders have to be with you and say, listen, for a short amount of time, we're going to incur cost of having a separate environment. And we're going to be okay with that to reduce risk because we care about our brand. And because I watched this presentation on Go Live Planning, I am scared to death about hard launching a website because of all the things that can go wrong. Therefore, let's soft launch, test, communicate, and launch with confidence into our new Sitecore environment and make sure that we can maintain that going forward. So a lot of this is common sense. I want to take a step back here and say, is anything shocking? Or is there any one thing that came up in this presentation that might help you go forward if you're launching a whole new Sitecore site? And again, launch, we're not talking about your regular code releases. We're talking about a whole new rebrand or upgrade that you just performed. So questions, comments, concerns?
Yeah, one question, Kelly. Here you
Sure.
talked about the load testing, right? So I think
Yes,
load testing is not bind to the deployment. It can be like after deployment as well, right? Because when
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you want to, load test before you launch, and then after you launch, you want to do a load test of what I like to do is I have a separate staging environment that is architectural integrity of production. What that means is it has the same parts and moving pieces, but it's isolated enough where I can run load test on my code in a UAT manner to make sure everything's working well before I deploy the code in production as part of a code release. It allows me to test new features and allows me also to do regression testing. So you want to make sure you do all your proper testing, regression to make sure not only your one feature works, but all the other features that can be impacted by that feature are still working. And load test to make sure that any new features and functionality are still working anytime you do a code release. And you might do a code release a week. You can automate this. I like to use Azure DevOps and I automate BlazeMeter. And we have automated load tests going on all the time of our environments. So when we deploy code, we don't, before it gets to production, it's already load tested in a like environment that's very close to production. Is that helpful?
yeah, so I guess um, load testing can be, as you mentioned, it can be a part of that soft launch. So after you do
Yes.
the soft launch, then after that you can have a load testing on the particular environment, and then if everything goes well, then you can do a proper hard launch.
Yep.
Right.
And you might want to occasionally load test production on a quarterly basis to make sure that networking is still going well. And just do that off hours in a window or during
Mhm.
the maintenance. Yeah, load testing, do not go live without load testing your environment. And if something's wrong, I can't emphasize this enough. Do not have a bunch of people holding onto the rocket with parachutes to jump off, bolting on stuff with your go live. Make sure that if something's wrong in your production environment, fix it in the lower environments first. Go through all your stage gates to make sure you don't miss any QA steps before redeploying to production. Just keep going through the same steps and again until you get it right. The key here is, a lot of the rocket launches, when you see a space shuttle go into space, there's probably about 30 other rockets that have been tested and not worked before that one was successful. It's okay to launch stuff up internally and testing with your team before you go live to the public. It really is the cost of going live. So you gotta break some rockets before you launch a real one. No one wants to get into a rocket that's not been tested, right?
All right. So any tool you want to suggest for load testing for site?
For load testing, I do like BlazeMeter. I also like SmartBear. Anything that's kind of got real users or can emulate um, user path, meaning that it can walk through the user journey. It might test the home page and automatically click on a link that goes to path to purchase. So if you have any kind of e-commerce I always like setting up load testing that tests the path to purchase. Meaning I go to an advertising page, I click on stuff, I add to cart, and I check out. There are load testing tools that can do that for you. And SmartBear, BlazeMeter, there's a few different options that are really nice.
Okay. And all are paid, right? Nothing's free.
They are paid, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Unless you want to get an army of interns and have them all click on your website at the same time. But that's, you know, not as consistent as far as load. You want to hit
Okay.
your website, hit it hard. Think about your worst day ever with load. Like maybe you have your marketing team is going to do ads during the Super Bowl or your biggest cricket game of the year. I love cricket and I know we get good attendance, right? Um, but let's envision that and then double that and see what your website can do. Stress your website and make sure that it tops out around 70% of its load. So you don't want to say, okay, where our website can, it normally runs about 85%, 95% CPU. No, that's too high. Make sure it's 70% or lower. Sometimes people like to be in the 30 to 40% range for the website. Um, so make sure your load over time is manageable where you can take a hit, where somebody can unexpectedly hit your website and maybe they're a bad bot and you can recover from an attack, but also that you can recover from a good problem, which is a marketing campaign. Maybe your website does really well and everybody wants to go to it. Well, make sure you can scale properly too. When we load test, we're not only testing our code, we're testing the environment and make sure it can scale properly. So you can test your auto scaling, deployment of additional instances if you're using app services, test your Vercel if you're doing like a XM Cloud and make sure everything's working well and scaling well.
Mm,
Good questions about the load testing. You have to obsess about it. You really do.
thank you.
Additional questions, team? Is there anything new here that you're seeing that changes how you think about launching a Sitecore site? A lot more steps, right, than you originally think about?
I guess most of the part we do. Uh, Only thing is load testing. So actually, we don't do it. Maybe somebody else from other team may be doing it.
Sure, that's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you just want to make sure you review that and look for the code issues. And
Yeah.
think about what
Sure.
happens if you don't do that. Are you comfortable putting your website into space without knowing if they can accept the load? We've been there, right? You've been there on the calls in the middle of the night when something's wrong. You've been there rushing with your code and stressing out, unsure if it's going to work on day of launch. You're stressing out and making sure that everything deploys properly, and you might forget about certificates. We've all been here. But what I'm saying today is don't take the hard path. The biggest challenge of taking this approach is convincing the business to pay for a separate environment that you work on and deploy to before go live. That's your biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And making sure that your project manager and your team and the business supporting it are really engaged. Those are the biggest challenges you're going to face.
Yeah. That's
So any other comments, questions, or concerns? Or is a lot of this common sense and you feel you're willing to adopt this approach?
Well,
All
no
right,
questions right now. So
okay.
the presentation was very great, and like I know that you are very active community member. So in between, if anybody has anything, they can directly reach out to on Slack and other social media networks, right?
Yes, please. And just thank you for your time today. I know some of these topics can be a little dry. I'm not talking about the cool tools, but doing things like successful go live planning, allowing
Mhm.
like really allows you to play with the cool tools like the Sitecore stream and the new themes. If
Yeah.
you launch successfully, people have trust in your platform. And this is about building trust and your own confidence in your own solution to be successful. So thank you all for your time. Uh, as always, I hope and pray that your families and you are well and have a great year. If you have questions or comments or follow-ups, like Sumit already said, I'm very active on our social media across LinkedIn, Twitter, and the Sitecore Slack. So please reach out. Other than that, it's just been a pleasure, and thank you for taking your time out today to meet with me.
Sure.
Thanks a
Thanks a
lot,
lot.
Kelly, for your time.
Yeah.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Kelly.
Great
Bye.
Take
opportunity.
care.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, all.